As a bill recently hit the House floor that would lock the United States into buying Bitcoin for the next 5 years. The legislation comes from Alaska Congressman Nick Begich, and it has a name, the American Reserve Modernization Act, or ARMA. Here's what it does. ARMA authorizes the U.S. Treasury to acquire up to 200,000 Bitcoin per year over the next 5 years with a target reserve of 1 million BTC. It builds on the original Bitcoin Act that Begich introduced alongside Senator Cynthia Lummis, and it would codify President Trump's March 2025 executive order creating a strategic Bitcoin reserve into permanent law. 9 congressmen have already announced their support, and the bill classifies Bitcoin as a Tier 1 strategic reserve asset, putting it on the same footing as gold. It also ends the practice of auctioning off seized Bitcoin. So going forward, government-held BTC would be transferred directly into the reserve and consolidated onto a single audited ledger. The funding mechanism is where things get clever. ARMA proposes what it calls budget-neutral Bitcoin accumulation by revaluing Federal Reserve gold certificates that are still priced at $42.22 per ounce, a statutory price set back in 1973. The accounting adjustment alone could unlock hundreds of billions in paper gains with no new taxpayer debt. The bill also establishes federal custody standards, geographically distributed air-gapped storage, multi-signature governance, investment into quantum-resistant cryptography, and once Bitcoin enters the reserve, it cannot be sold for at least 20 years. Representative Mike Roll backed the bill on X, writing, "There will only ever be 21 million Bitcoin. While governments can print unlimited amounts of money, Bitcoin supply is permanently fixed." Representative Pat Harrigan added that the United States government already holds billions in seized Bitcoin with no coherent strategy for managing it, and that needs to change. The shift here is the part nobody saw coming just 5 years ago. Washington spent a decade treating Bitcoin like a curiosity to be seized and dumped at auction. Now, there's a serious bill in Congress treating it like something the country needs to own a million of and not touch for 2 decades. All right, now joining us this morning, the man whose model legislation has been quietly rewriting Bitcoin policy across state capitals nationwide. Please welcome the CEO and co-founder of the Satoshi Action Fund, Dennis Porter, to this show. Dennis, welcome to the show. Great to have you. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah.
Happy Tuesday. How are you?
Hey, glad to be on here with you today. Really appreciate it. Looking forward to chatting about policy.
Likewise. Let's get right into it, Dennis. And I want to start with this story we just talked about here. And this one feels a little different from the state level bills you've been working on previously. The American Reserve Modernization Act is federal, it's ambitious, and it puts Bitcoin in Tier 1 status alongside gold. So can you walk us through what Begich actually pulled off here? And how is this bill structured differently from Senator Lummis's original Bitcoin Act? And what makes you think it has a real shot of moving forward? I'd love to get the inside slant.
Yeah, so one of the key differences here for this piece of legislation is it does not use any taxpayer funds to be able to purchase Bitcoin. Additionally, the bill itself codifies the digital asset stockpile as well as the strategic Bitcoin reserve. Both of those were created through executive order by President Trump. The interesting part about the legislation is that it allows for the assets within the digital asset stockpile to be sold in order to purchase more Bitcoin. So that would be one technically budget neutral way to approach the purchase of Bitcoin. The bill also goes on to study additional ways to be able to purchase Bitcoin for the strategic Bitcoin reserve, where it will ultimately be held for at least 20 years. Of course, there's also going to be a potential look back or study by Congress within the bill itself that would look for additional ways to spend the Bitcoin. So instead of just saying like, hey, let's sell it for in order to cover the debt, which is how the bill is currently written, it asks Congress to also look within the 2-year mark out from the 20-year window to be able to determine how else the Bitcoin could be utilized. And as someone who cares a lot about the strategic importance of Bitcoin for national defense, there's going to be some ways where we'll need to be able to use Bitcoin in order to protect our national borders, in order to protect our national security, that are in alignment with how Jason Lowery talks about Bitcoin with regards to soft war and the use cases that exist therein. So yeah, happy to answer any additional questions about the legislation. Excited to see Congressman Begich pick up the torch, so to speak, from the Lummis camp.
Yeah.
Senator Lummis, the big thing to keep in mind here is Senator Lummis will not be in Congress next session. She has decided to retire from Congress, unlike many of the folks in Congress who decide to stay probably a little bit too long. So good for her,
Yeah.
Although it's unfortunate to lose a Bitcoin champion. But Congressman Begich will likely be around for some time to come. And so having him pick up the torch and carry this within the House is going to be huge for continuing to fight this effort. Although I do know there is going to be a concerted effort to try to pass the bill this year. At bare minimum, I think it's huge. Even if it doesn't pass this year, it's huge that you have a congressman picking up the torch and continuing to fight for this effort.
Yeah, there's certainly no replacing Senator Lummis, but we're glad Begich, it sounds like, is ready to do his best to fill into those shoes, because we certainly need that pro-Bitcoin advocate, or that Bitcoin advocacy in the government. And I want to get back to this bill here, specifically, Dennis, the funding mechanism part, because it seems to be getting a lot of attention, because they're talking about revaluing Federal Reserve gold certificates from about $42 an ounce currently, which was a price set back in 1973, to today's current, which I don't know what it's at now. It is like it's something really high up there. Either way, it could unlock hundreds of billions of dollars in paper gains without adding to the national debt or costing taxpayers anything. It feels clever on paper, but I'd be curious, are you able to break down how that would actually work in practice? And is Congress likely to go along with what is essentially an accounting maneuver of that type of scale? And also, why haven't we revalued the gold yet if it's at $42 an ounce? It's 1973. That's 50 years ago.
I mean, theoretically, it's possible to, pursue these types of accounting tricks to be able to purchase more Bitcoin. However, this piece is not within the legislation within ARMA. It's we could take it up for another one of those like social media making things go viral, and then before anybody has the opportunity to really talk about what the legislation actually does, it's gone viral, and now everybody thinks that this is a bill to revalue the price of gold. But there is no revaluation of the price of gold within the current legislation. There is an interesting component where it does track what happens within the Exchange Stabilization Fund, which I think is critically important for us to be aware of what's going on within that fund, if there's any Bitcoin touching it. But right now, there is no other mechanism to be able to purchase Bitcoin other than taking the confiscated Bitcoin that was given to Treasury through criminal forfeiture. So this is, fraudsters, scammers, known criminals that have given up their Bitcoin to Treasury because of criminal proceedings. And Treasury, after trying to make sure that they get any type of digital asset back to a consumer or a victim of a crime, holds on to that remaining Bitcoin and digital assets within the Bitcoin reserve and the digital asset stockpile. Now, one of the other really interesting things that this legislation does too, because I need to correct myself a little bit, it's not all within there right now. Not all the Bitcoin and all the digital assets across the government are within the strategic Bitcoin reserve and the digital asset stockpile. But this bill, what it does is it says, no, you really got to put it all here. We have to put it in one place. There's essentially a government-wide accounting. I believe it was 60 days that it takes where everybody within the government, every agency within the government, any Bitcoin that they're holding, any digital assets that they're holding onto that do not belong to some type of victim, belong within the strategic Bitcoin reserve or belong within the digital asset stockpile. Yeah, I know it's one of these things where I think I've been a part of so many bill introductions and passages now at this point. I've seen this time and time again where one account online is like, we're going to buy 5% of the Bitcoin with this bill. And then the internet goes viral and everybody believes that's the intent of the bill. Yet it never once mentions, revaluing gold within the digital asset stockpile or for the purposes of buying Bitcoin for the strategic Bitcoin reserve.
Yeah, no, I definitely get that. Rumors and hearsay move at the speed of Twitter, which is like milliseconds these days. So I definitely understand that. And I appreciate you clarifying what was actually in that bill. And the bill itself, is gaining some support. We've already seen 9 congressmen have signed on. So, Dennis, from your experience inside this world, what does the path from 9 co-sponsors to actual passage actually look like? Like, where do these bills usually die? Is it the committee, the floor, the Senate, somewhere else? And what would specifically tell you, or would you tell our viewers to be watching for in the next 60 to 90 days? What are you keeping an eye on? I'd love to get the beat from your angle.
Yeah, absolutely. So the co-sponsor list has also jumped significantly since the bill was introduced. The original amount of lawmakers that signed on to the legislation was 21 as co-sponsors. There was 1 Democrat who signed on. Additionally, since the bill has been introduced, there are multiple other co-sponsors that are looking to join in on the legislation. As you can imagine, the vast majority of these, of course, are Republicans. There was that 1 Democrat that I mentioned. And that is really going to be helpful because my next point is on the passage of the legislation. You need to be able to have bipartisan support, not necessarily in the House, but really in the Senate. The House is a place where, you could pass a bill by a simple majority, and Republicans currently hold on to the majority in the House. So they could pass a bill with virtually no Democratic support. In the Senate, there is a Senate rule that in order to get a bill to move forward, and we'll just keep this as simple as possible without over-explaining the rule, but in order to get a bill through, you have to have 60 votes for the vast majority of legislation. Not all legislation, but the vast majority of legislation, especially legislation like this. So that in and of itself, when you say you need 60 senators, it means you're going to need to have about 6, maybe even 7 Democrats cross the aisle to support this legislation. So the biggest hurdle for the entire package is not getting it through the House. It's not getting it through committee. It is getting it through the Senate, where you'll need that strong bipartisan support in order to get it across the finish line. And that's TBD. There are certainly Democrats who support it, but I think the big problem is really sort of like political right now. People, Democrats are looking at the midterms. They can feel the wind in their sails. They feel that they're going to have an opportunity to take over the House and possibly even the Senate. Why spend time trying to help Trump get his crypto agenda across the finish line when you're oh so close to grabbing onto power yourself? Why give him any arrows in his quiver? So that's something you have to overcome, and that's true no matter what, who's coming into power, who's going out of power, no matter what election year it is. Unfortunately, politics plays a role in how we decide to make decisions on policy, and ultimately Democrats are going to have to weigh, am I thinking more long term here? Do I really believe in trying to get this across the finish line versus, oh, this is going to be helpful to Trump. It might help him secure some additional votes in the midterms. And that's something that we find politically untenable.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up the parties here, Dennis, because I'd be curious, from what you're seeing, like how is Bitcoin being received by the other side of the aisle right now? We know it's kind of been a right side of the aisle thing for a bit now, but as we saw in the last elections, the crypto and Bitcoin crowd seems like somebody you can't really ignore in elections right now. We saw Trump, got his second term in office, I think very much in part because he spoke to those members of the country. Do you see the Democratic side kind of taking to Bitcoin as well? Like, because either they think it's a good idea or maybe just because it's becoming too big to ignore? Like, what's the temperature like on that side of the aisle?
Well, it depends if you're asking about voters or if you're asking about lawmakers. If you're asking about lawmakers, we are seeing it become increasingly difficult in recent years to have them publicly and openly support Bitcoin or really any type of cryptocurrency because of how Trump has engaged on this issue, which is to say that not only has he been favorable, which already creates an instant reaction from the opposing party. Like anytime you're for something, the other party is usually against it. That's just kind of the way things go here. Not always, but that happens quite a bit. But additionally, also, the Trump family has become increasingly wealthy off of the cryptocurrency space. Particularly Trump's sons have made quite large sums of money. And so that is causing Democrats to have a lot of concern and hesitation, primarily also because their voters care about this. Their voters are like, why are you helping Trump get rich? Like, shouldn't you be like blocking anything to do with crypto? But then if you look at the voters, though, and I did bring up some voters there, some voters are concerned. Some voters want this process to be slowed down. They don't want to see the crypto agenda move forward. But there's quite a number of different polls that have been done where they have gone out and they've asked different folks in the United States, based on their political affiliation, what their views of Bitcoin and digital assets are. And we have seen time and time again that it is very bipartisan. And in some instances, even the far left is more favorable towards the ownership of Bitcoin than the far right, which is completely counterintuitive to the way people think about the technology. But ultimately, you have to remember that Bitcoin is a tool that is great for human rights. It is great for being able to spend across borders. It is great for financial inclusion. And so it tends to attract this more like far left, not even like moderate left, like far left individual who might be like, wow, wouldn't it be great to have Bitcoin in case Trump ever tries to like block me out of the financial system, right? It's like the way they're thinking, right?
How that works.
It's more on the extreme side, but Bitcoin is made for extreme situations. It's made for day-to-day commerce, but it's also made and built for those individuals who have been left out of the financial system.
Yeah, and you mentioned something that I wanted to touch on here, Dennis, about that, a seeming percent of the population feels a certain way as a result of the way Trump has kind of gone about handling the crypto and Bitcoin industry. Obviously, we've seen Bitcoin get a lot of nice, these bills are being put in place that probably wouldn't have happened without Trump. But then he also, as you mentioned, has gotten him and his family very wealthy as a result of being in things like Trump coin and Melania coin and American Bitcoin and all that stuff. So my question for you is, at the end of the day, do you think that what kind of effect do you think Trump has had on the Bitcoin ecosystem? And is it an ultimately net positive or a net negative one? Because I feel like in the short term, it's definitely net positive. But if you're talking about like, people are going to start thinking crypto goes along, or Bitcoin is akin to Trump coin and stuff. So I think that leaves some kind of long lasting effects and taste in people's mouths that maybe aren't too knowledgeable about the industry. So what do you think about what we've seen from Trump in his first year and a half back in office? Has it generally been positive, or is there some other things we should be maybe paying attention to? Because I'm curious as to how Bitcoin and crypto is going to continue to go once he's out of office again. I'd love to get your thoughts as someone closer to the action.
So yeah, when you're analyzing the Trump administration's impact on Bitcoin and crypto, I think it's important to keep in mind that we're still in that administration, and that depending on the outcomes of the current administration that we're in, until we really see how this all plays out, especially I think the next 6 months, we won't really know, what the net benefit is. Right now, I would say void of a Bitcoin reserve being passed into law and void of market structure passed into law, that it is a net negative. But if you were able to get those two major pieces of policy across the finish line, you could make an argument that it has been a net positive. And the reason I say net negative is really because the amount of people that have been turned off by this ecosystem because of the increasing and incredible levels of activity by the Trump family. But some people will argue, he's a businessman, he should be able to do whatever business he wants. That's fine. I'm not saying whether in this current context right here, in this conversation right here, I'm not saying whether it's right or wrong to do these things. Although I would argue that there's certainly some things that raise some major eyebrows. What I'm trying to say is that regardless of your opinion of whether he should or should not be allowed to do this, to be able to build these companies, World Liberty Fi, the Trump coin, you name it, the impact of that is that you have half, maybe even more of the country who are now turning away from this industry because they feel that it has become a tool for MAGA. That is a short-term impact, of course, too. So that'll be rode out when Trump is gone, when we've moved on to the next era of political policymakers. Sometimes voters have short memories when it comes to this stuff. Like, they're not going to care so much about it, in 10 years. But in the near term, it's certainly having an impact. We're seeing that all across the space. We're seeing more than ever in these polls, which do show that sort of like bipartisan interest. We're seeing also for the first time voters who say they are less likely to vote for a lawmaker if they support any type of crypto. And that has never picked up on polling before. We've never seen any type of polling where people say, if you are specifically pro crypto, I will specifically vote against you. But we are seeing that in the polls, and it's a strong reaction to what's going on with the Trump administration or with President Trump right now. So certainly in the near term, I believe it's a negative. That can change if we get some of these policy wins across the finish line. But if we don't, I think the history books will read this as a net negative and all for Bitcoin, given especially the price of Bitcoin today.
Yeah, I got to say, Dennis, I really find that a refreshing perspective. Most of the people I talk to are just like, it's a net positive, look, but I'm just like, I don't know, man. I mean, there's, like you said, it's turned off like half the population that now thinks it's a party issue when it's just, it's not. And I'll be really curious to see what the long-lasting ramifications are. And I really appreciate you kind of saying, like, listen, it kind of depends on whether or not some of these bills actually get passed. And if they don't, this might continue to be a net negative going forward. Obviously, only time will tell, but I really appreciate that because I feel like most of the time people are just like, oh, it's all great all the time, but it's like maybe not. So it was very refreshing to hear that.
I will say,
now,
just,
I want to talk.
Just jumping in there real quick on that issue
is,
when you're talking about politics in DC, I don't blame people who believe that it's been a net positive. I think there's a clear argument to make there, but the people that are trying to make that argument, like just sort of, I think hopeful and positive thinking is partly also because they are probably either really close to the Trump administration, they are close to Republicans, and they want to see a positive outcome here. So sometimes like cheerleading is also a net positive in this industry. Like when you get out there and you say, don't worry guys, everything's great, we're going to get it done. Like it's very hard to maintain momentum in Washington, D.C. And so sometimes you need those like cheerleaders that are out there, like, getting in front of the camera and saying like really positive things about what's going on, because that's how you kind of keep the momentum going. So I certainly, even though I have a different opinion of the positive or the net negative effect of the Trump administration, like I don't blame people who get out here on camera and say positive things, because they are very incentivized to do that, and that's really, really common in Washington, D.C. I would say that's probably 80% of this town is really sort of doing that on a regular basis.
And to your point, I feel like we see a lot less people kind of talking positively about the space in general as a result of kind of the change we've seen. Because I remember back, in the COVID era days, everybody and their mother was on the TikToks and the Bitcoin this, and it really spoke to like the fervor and the momentum of the industry. But we've definitely seen that kind of slow down in the last year and a half, and the crypto TikToks are a lot quieter than they used to be. And I think it's because of the sentiment has shifted to very much the point you mentioned. And I want to kind of dial it back here to ARMA here really quick, because I had a couple more questions for you on this, Dennis. One of the things that stood out to me was this 20-year hold clause, because that's the part that seemingly would really change the game. Once Bitcoin enters the reserve, it can't be sold for 2 decades. That's a generational policy decision we're talking about right now. So my question for you is, what happens if there is a major recession in 2030 or a political party flip in 2028? Can a future Congress just undo this, or does the structure actually protect it from any kind of future political swings?
So if you pass into law a 20-year hold period for Bitcoin today, it would require a future act of Congress in order to spend the Bitcoin before that 20-year period. So it doesn't prevent future lawmakers, future Congresses from changing the rules. They just become difficult to change because, of course, you have to go through the House, the 60-vote threshold in the Senate, and they get a signature from the president. So just as a short answer, keeping it super quick and easy for you here, no, it doesn't prevent future congressional efforts from, who may want to spend the Bitcoin in the case of an emergency, which would be the exact kind of environment where you would get the strong majority support in order to change those rules.
Mm-hmm. No, I appreciate you breaking that down. I was very curious what the actual rules were around that. And then if we were to, zoom out for a second here, Dennis, 5 years ago, the United States government was auctioning off seized Bitcoin at fire sale prices. Today, there's a serious bill in Congress trying to lock up 1 million coins for 20 years. Begs the question, what actually changed inside Washington that made this possible? Was it all Trump? And is the rest of the world kind of watching this and maybe starting to move? Or is the U.S. genuinely about to front run every other G7 nation on this? So what's your beat on what we're seeing here?
I mean, it's always, when you're talking about Washington, it's always a series of very fortunate events when you want to see positive outcomes take place. I would certainly give quite a bit of credit to Senator Lummis. She has been a leader on Bitcoin and digital asset policy, predating President Trump's interest in the technology. However, yes, he played a major role in the policy movements. That's why I say, despite the fact that he has pushed so many people away from the technology because of their political persuasions, if we're able to get this legislation across the finish line, you could debate and argue, I think, on the side of it being a net positive. But because of the fact that he has, used it as a tool, for his family has used it as a tool to enrich themselves, that has casted a serious shadow over the space. And that doesn't include all of the other scams and fraudsters that are out there who are doing real, legitimate harm to the ecosystem as well. But I would certainly say that it's a lot of the lawmakers and the advocates who have been up here on on Capitol Hill for so many years, pushing for lawmakers to better understand the technology. You have a number of incredible trade associations who have done a lot of work, even though they are, corporate sort of groups. Ultimately, they have been the ones that have been funding a lot of the education around this technology. You have seen a number of different groups stand up in recent years to be able to support the technology. You have seen a lot of funding come the way of people that support the technology, although I think I'm certainly someone who's in favor of campaign finance reform. You still can't ignore the effective way that the ecosystem has utilized the current rules on the books to be able to help encourage lawmakers to be pro-Bitcoin, pro-crypto, just through the financial support that they've provided to these lawmakers. I mean, I think we're like breaking records right now with the crypto industry. Other industries are actually looking to the crypto industry and what they've done in the super PAC space, in the PAC space, and in the advocacy space, because we have been so effective at changing the tune in Washington, D.C. And again, I will say again that I think we need campaign finance reform in this country, but there has been no industry that has better taken advantage of the current rules on the books to be able to advantage themselves in Congress.
Yeah, no, I think I totally agree with you. I appreciate breaking that down. We have more to talk about here, specifically this next act that's part of our next story. So hang 10 here, Dennis. I'm going to bring you back in just a second to chat, because momentum is building behind the Digital Asset Market Clarity Act, with Senator Dave McCormick now saying he believes the legislation could pass this summer. McCormick also added that incoming Fed Chair Kevin Warsh would bring a steady hand to the Fed as Washington enters a major transition period for monetary policy and digital asset regulation. Take a look.
So what should we expect then from the Clarity Act? You're in the Senate Banking Committee. You've got the Clarity Act. You've got Kevin Warsh. You've been busy with all of these two major issues. We're expecting Kevin Warsh to get sworn in on Friday. Is that your expectation? And what is your expectation for the Clarity Act?
Well, my expectation for the Clarity Act is that it'll ultimately pass the Senate and will either go to conference or one of the bodies will accept the other's version. But I think we're on a path to having this signed into law this summer. That's optimistic, but I think it's likely. And having it on the president's desk, which will be a huge win for the president and a huge win for, I think, the kind of innovation we need in the United States to stay at the forefront. In terms of Kevin Warsh, I think it's a great pick by the president. I was honored to be able to introduce him at his hearing, and this is going to be a new day in the Federal Reserve. I think he's uniquely positioned to be able to lead. It's a tough hand, there's no doubt about it, but he's going to bring new thinking, creative thinking, and I think a steady hand to the Fed.
Earlier this month, the Senate Banking Committee passed the Clarity Act, moving the bill one step closer to a full Senate floor vote later this summer. Senator Cynthia Lummis, one of the leading champions of the bill, took to X with a sharper version of the same message, saying, "Every single day, digital asset companies are moving offshore because Congress hasn't done its job. My bill, the Clarity Act, fixes that. I will continue to fight to ensure America leads the way in digital asset regulation." And here's what she recently told Fox Business.
Senator Cynthia Lummis's Digital Asset Market Clarity Act has passed out of committee with bipartisan support, now headed for full vote on the Senate floor. And she joins us now to tell us more. Wyoming Senator Cynthia Lummis. And first of all, before we even start the conversation, the audience needs to know, you've been at this for a long time. You've always found a way to have bipartisan help with this. 2022 with Senator Gillibrand, Responsible Financial Innovation Act. Again in 2023, again in 2025. You pulled it over the finish line. What's next?
Well, next, we're going to take the bill that we passed in the Senate Banking Committee last week. We're going to combine it with the bill that's already passed the Ag Committee in the Senate, which deals with the Commodity Futures Trading Commission part of this subject. Then we're going to wrap in some language about ethics, as well as make some technical changes to the Genius Act. So then we're going to put it all together and present it on the Senate floor, hopefully sometime this summer.
All right, I want to bring Dennis back to the stage. Dennis, Senator Dave McCormick now says the Clarity Act could actually pass as soon as this summer, which is probably the first time the crypto industry has heard a real legislative timeline instead of vague promises. My question for you, Dennis, how significant is that comment coming from someone on the Senate Banking Committee? What do you think about what we heard there?
Yeah, absolutely. I do think there's a real chance to pass this legislation in this Congress, hopefully sometime before the August recess. As Senator Lummis said, the next step is going to be combining the banking version with the ag version. And then once those two are combined, they're going to hopefully, as she mentioned, add in some ethics provisions, which I think is really the key part to getting this across the finish line. As we talked about earlier in the podcast, or earlier in the show, I should say, we talked about how there is some concerns around how much money the Trump family has made off of the cryptocurrency industry. The ethics provisions would be put in place almost explicitly to be able to prevent this type of activity in the future. It would probably include not only members of the executive branch, but also lawmakers as well. Definitely something that we at Satoshi Action support. I have actually testified in favor of legislation twice to this effect at the state level, where we would prevent lawmakers from being able to hopefully prevent them from enriching themselves off the technology. I mean, at the end of the day, public trust is an important good within the policy space. And when you have the public trust, you can drive more effective policy outcomes. If the Trump family wasn't making money off the crypto industry, it's likely Clarity would already have passed into law. And I'm not the only one saying this. There are other lawmakers, including Republicans, who have come out and said that the Trump family making money off the space has slowed down and encumbered the policy process. So she will likely, hopefully, as she said, will be able to add an ethics provision in there. I know a number of Democrats who have said that, to me personally, and I'm talking directly to members of Congress here, that they will not vote for this legislation unless there is strong ethics provisions within the text itself. And politically, it's almost impossible for them to vote for it unless there is something in there. Now, that doesn't mean that, it's quite possible that if nothing was in there with regards to ethics and we were moving forward with this legislation, would some Democrats feel the need to vote in favor of this legislation because of future maybe presidential or political ambitions? It's possible. But in my opinion, it would be very, very difficult to get the numbers that you need, not just from Democrats, but also some Republicans who care about this as well, in order for it to pass that 60 vote threshold in the Senate. But after that, it goes to, as McCormick said, it's either conference or they're going to sort of like pick which version they want to go with, send it over to the other chamber and hope they pass it into law. It's most likely that the Senate version is the version that gets worked off of, sent over to the House, and the House passes that, and then we go to the president's desk. I've been told multiple times it's unlikely that we go to a conference committee, but you never know in Washington, D.C. Things can just change on a dime here.
Yeah, they certainly can, and I appreciate you breaking that whole situation down for us. But it does beg the question, why is this ethics provision such a sticking point when Nancy Pelosi's made like $100 million basically insider trading for years and nobody seems to care? Wow, is it as simple as Trump? Is the answer Trump?
In partly because of that, but also, I will say, just on your comment around Nancy Pelosi, is that she's pivoted and actually supported congressional bans on insider stock trading. So we have seen this as a growing, made all of her money. Yeah, we're seeing this as a growing political concern within Washington, D.C., just writ large. I would love to see a full ethics package or a full ethics provision that changes a lot of the rules in Washington, D.C., particularly around the ability for lawmakers to trade. I think that they should either have to exit all of their stock positions or hold it into a trust where no type of trades can be made until they have left Washington, D.C. The difficult part is also, oftentimes it ends up being the family members of lawmakers that do the trading, which is what we are seeing with the Trump family with regards to crypto. And you may think it's a big number for Nancy Pelosi to have made $100 million. I don't know how much of that is particularly from insider trading, but that's over the lifetime of her career. We've seen the Trump administration make over $1 billion from cryptocurrency just within the first 6 months of his administration. So it's really sort of just pales in comparison. I know people will try to say, well, Democrats have always been, just as corrupt as we are. I think we should really hold all of ourselves to a higher standard. Now is the political time where we can be asking for more from our lawmakers, and we should be doing that when we are given those political opportunities.
Yeah, absolutely. We should be. I agree. I mean, people give me shit for this. I'm pardon my French, but it's like I expect more from the people in charge. They're supposed to be the adults in the room, but they're just a lot of them are taking advantage of the situation and their position, which I don't love. Now, I want to get back to the Clarity Act here for a second, Dennis, because it seems like the whole pitch for this thing is basically let's stop forcing crypto companies offshore because nobody in Washington can clearly explain the rules. So my question for you, Dennis, is do you think that this bill genuinely creates clarity for the industry, or does it simply replace one form of confusion with another? Like, are you high on the Clarity bill and what it will actually change going forward, or maybe not so much?
So I definitely don't think that the Clarity Act is a perfect piece of legislation in the House or the Senate. However, generally speaking, the most important thing that it does, which I think is critical, is it provides clarity around whether something is a digital commodity or whether something is a digital security. That is going to be critically important so that we do not face a future administration where they're able to use executive authority to go after these individuals. Regulation by enforcement was very common within the last administration. Gary Gensler was the sort of the tip of the spear with regards to this, but it was also happening at the state level as well. And it wasn't just happening with chief securities officers for Democratic states. It was also happening in Republican states as well. So we certainly need these rules on the books so that individuals that are building and that are creating in this space know where they land. They know what the rules are. Even if those rules aren't perfect, like having a set of rules is going to be massive, because when you're thinking about where you're going to build your company, or you're an investor who wants to invest $1 billion into this space, regardless of what end of the spectrum you are on, you want to know that if you build, that it's going to last. You want to know that if you invest, that your money isn't going to be washed away by some future administration that wants to target the industry that you are a part or you are investing into. So yes, I absolutely believe it's critical to pass Clarity. I don't think it's a perfect bill, but at the end of the day, we can also make improvements in future Congresses when we realize what are some of the gaps that we might have missed in this current piece of legislation.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, hey, it's something, and we don't need another samurai wallet situation where, developers are getting put in prison for developing software that people use how they use it. Like, that's crazy. So, I agree with you on that. And obviously, like a lot of people also agree. Senator Cynthia Lummis has been warning that we need to get this done because America risks losing the digital asset industry entirely if Congress keeps dragging its feet. So that begs the question here, Dennis. At this point, is the United States actually in danger of falling behind globally on crypto when it comes to like infrastructure innovation, or is that just talk?
It really just depends on what future admins look like. Let's assume that clarity doesn't pass this year and the next administration is friendly to crypto, regardless of which party they come from, then builders will continue to build here. However, I think they do it with a little bit of skepticism and concern because they know that those rules are not codified into law. They're not in statute. But if the next administration comes in, regardless of political party, and is anti-crypto, then all of a sudden you will see almost an immediate offshoring of the digital asset technology that's being built here in the United States. Nobody wants to go to jail for building cryptocurrency technology or Bitcoin technology. No. And so they will go offshores. They did go offshores previously. We have won a lot of those folks back into the United States over the last several years. But those hard-earned gains can be stripped away pretty rapidly if all of a sudden everybody that's building in the space realizes they could go to jail or they can be sued by the federal government. Nobody is going to have to deal with that type of an environment, and they will leave if they are forced to do so.
Yeah, no, I mean, the developers are obviously a very important part of the entire ecosystem. And another part of that ecosystem that I want to talk about is the new Fed chair, Kevin Warsh. McCormick also tied this conversation to Warsh as he's the incoming Fed. We saw him just get confirmed last week. And McCormick said he'd bring a steady hand during a major transition period for monetary policy and digital assets. So my question for you, Dennis, is how much does the next Fed chair realistically matter when it comes to Bitcoin and crypto regulation going forward? I know Warsh has said he thinks Bitcoin is important. How big of a deal do you think it is to have a Fed chair that seemingly is pro Bitcoin going forward? Is it that big of a deal, or is it maybe a little overblown right now, just compared to maybe what we saw with Powell?
Oh, it's certainly a big deal for two reasons. One is if you have a favorable Fed chair, you won't have a Federal Reserve that is trying to debank or get rid of people within the space, and they view Bitcoin as valuable. So that on its face is of course important. Second of all, the Fed also sets interest rates which directly impact Bitcoin. Bitcoin is a tool that is built to be able to help protect people from monetary debasement, from runaway inflation. So the amount of money the Fed, we should keep in mind also, it's not just the interest rate, but also the balance sheet of the Fed. But the amount of money that the Fed has on its balance sheet, the interest rates that it sets are going to directly impact the price of Bitcoin. And it's funny because even Kevin Warsh, in a recent interview, he talked about how Bitcoin could actually be used as a tool to keep the Federal Reserve in check or other central banks in check, because it is a tool that is sort of like a reflection. This is something we've said for a long time, or I have said personally for a long time, that people are like, well, eventually Bitcoin will take over, and I said and like this will just be the new Federal Reserve. I'm not trying to like paint that out of the realm of possibility, but ultimately what I think Bitcoin will do is it will serve as a check and balance against sort of poor or ill-advised monetary policy at the Fed, because every time that they print more money or decide to be irresponsible, Bitcoin gains in value. And so it is sort of a reflection device for them to be able to compare and contrast the impacts of their policy decisions at the Federal Reserve.
And I'm so glad you brought that up, Dennis, because I've been thinking about this and I feel like I haven't gotten a clear answer for it yet. And I'm hoping you can provide me some clarity here. So Warsh has said that, hey, we'll look at Bitcoin and it's kind of a reflection of how good or not good the Fed is doing at their job, right? But wouldn't that, in a sense, then incentivize the Fed to make decisions that keep the Bitcoin price lower? Because then it assumes that they're doing a better job at the Fed if the price is lower, because if it's higher, it means there's probably too much money printing and stuff going on. So aren't those things like kind of at opposite ends a little bit? I feel like I'm missing something here, because when I heard him say that, I was like, wait a second, doesn't that mean you'd be incentivized to do things that keep the price of Bitcoin lower? Because the price of Bitcoin is lower, doesn't that mean he's doing a better job at the Fed? Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And I've certainly thought about this many times. Like, oh man, what if one day we get a really responsible Fed chair? What is that going to do to the price of Bitcoin? I still don't. We are screwed. I think the other point though is that of course we are incredibly early with regards to Bitcoin. So having a future Fed chair, 20 years from now, who's much more responsible, I think would be place a much bigger impact on the price of Bitcoin. But just given how incredibly early we are, the decisions that the Fed chair would make to be able to help correct some of the, inappropriate, or I would say runaway monetary debasement that we have seen in the past. Of course, that would be a short-term feeling, short-term pain. Long-term, of course, Bitcoin goes up, the price of Bitcoin goes up, because at the end of the day, no matter how conservative you try to be at the Fed, you're never going to be as conservative as 21 million Bitcoin.
Yeah, well, we'll see. I appreciate you breaking that down, because that one's kind of been plaguing me for a minute now. But I guess we are still like $40 trillion in debt, so it might be foolish of me to think any big changes are coming in the short term. But I appreciate that. We got one more story that I was hoping to get your beat on before we let you go. Does that work?
Yeah, happy to stay on.
Rock and roll. All right, I'll bring you right back in a second here, Dennis. But first, a sitting U.S. congressman is arguing that Bitcoin is no longer just a financial asset. It is becoming a national security technology. In a new CoinDesk article, Texas Congressman Lance Gooden wrote that the Pentagon is currently researching how Bitcoin can be used to strengthen American cyber defenses. And he called Bitcoin the center of a paradigm shift in national security that the United States military is moving to capitalize on. His comments build directly on recent testimony from Admiral Samuel Paparo, who confirmed that United States Indo-Pacific Command is already running a Bitcoin node for operational testing. Paparo described Bitcoin as a computer science tool capable of helping secure military communications and networks. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth went further when he told lawmakers that Bitcoin can serve as a tool of power projection against China's digital authoritarianism, and he added that several Pentagon efforts involving Bitcoin remain classified. Gooden argues the United States is now entering a new geopolitical era where Bitcoin sits alongside energy, semiconductors, and artificial intelligence as strategically essential. I want to bring Dennis back. Dennis, at the Satoshi Action, I want to get your beat before I talk about the Action Fund. What do you make of this? Is Bitcoin really becoming this security technology in certain ways for the United States? And did you like that rhetoric you heard in that story? I'd love to get your beat on that one quick.
Yeah, absolutely. It was really good to see Representative Gooden, who has recently also wrote an article talking about the need for a Bitcoin reserve and also the need to onshore the manufacturing of Bitcoin mining hardware. Currently, 97% of that hardware is being built by Chinese firms that are linked to the PRC. Bitmain is, of course, the largest of those folks. And the big concern there is, of course, there could be kill switches or backdoors in these devices. We have seen this happen before, back in 2017. Antbleed, if you go look it up, you'll be able to see that there was a backdoor kill switch within the main line of Bitcoin products. And at that time, that covered nearly 70% of the world's total hash rate. So it's a significant security problem that I think lawmakers should be concerned with. And this problem is addressed within the Mined in America Act, which is a piece of legislation that is built to onshore the manufacturing of Bitcoin mining hardware. But going back to the comments around Admiral Paparo, Paparo is the head of Indo-PACOM, which covers roughly 60% of the world's population. It's one of the most important combatant commands that we have in the United States. Admiral Paparo, not that long ago, became aware of Jason Lowery's book Soft War. Jason Lowery wrote this thesis in 2023. I have been a huge fan, huge advocate of this work. The big thing here is that ultimately Bitcoin can be used as a tool for national defense. And the way that would work, because I think it's important to put this in context, but the way that would work is you could use Bitcoin as digital postage. You could use it as a way to prove authenticity. Currently today, if you were to use Bitcoin as a way to gate access to different types of cyber tools, that would be a very powerful use case. So as an example, right now, it's very, very cheap to attack United States infrastructure, critical infrastructure, and it's very expensive to defend it. Firms are spending millions, sometimes billions collectively to be able to defend themselves. And so what you can do is you can flip that sort of dynamic on its head and reverse the asymmetry of attack. Right now, they have an asymmetric advantage because it's very cheap to be able to spam, attack, DDoS, you name it. A really good example of this, like just to put it into context for folks, is right now your email address, you receive 10, 20, 30 items of spam a day. The reason why is because it's basically free to send that spam to you. And we get so much spam that we even have our own spam inbox. But physical mail requires postage. It's 78 cents for a forever stamp. And so even if you wanted to sort of send the equivalent spam to someone's home mailbox, you'd have to spend thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars to do the same type of attack, maybe even millions or billions of dollars, depending on how large of scale the attack was. So you can use that same sort of mental framework for how we can use Bitcoin as a tool to protect critical infrastructure. You could force people to spend a little bit of Bitcoin every time they want to try to attempt to log in to some sort of critical infrastructure. The defender just spends a tiny bit of Bitcoin because they already know what the answer is to log in. Whereas someone like China or someone with great cyber capabilities, if they tried to log in 1,000 times, 1,000,000 times, they might have to spend Bitcoin every single time they're doing that, which would flip that asymmetric attack into the advantage of the defender.
Oh, interesting. So every time you enter like a CAPTCHA phrase or something, you have to spend Bitcoin just to get access to that. So that prevents like the AI just doing it like 1,000,000 times over as we see. So is that kind of the purpose there? Am I understanding that correctly?
You're exactly getting it right. That's 100% true. And there's several other use cases that they're exploring. Really excited to see what they're doing over there. And this is, again, also why it's so important that we have our own supply chain of Bitcoin mining hardware, because if we are using Bitcoin not only for monetary policy and holding it in a reserve, but simultaneously using it for national defense, the fact that we have 38% of the hash rate is great here in the United States, but if that's undermined by a foundation of Chinese hardware, we are putting our national security and our own Bitcoin reserve into jeopardy.
Yeah, well, that's why we can't give them the good NVIDIA chips. We only give them the second best. We gotta stay ahead of those Chinese. Dennis, I gotta say, it's been really fun having you on the show. You have such a wealth of knowledge that I really appreciate you sharing with me and our audience this morning. I know you're doing God's work over at the Satoshi Action Fund. So before we let you go today, for those in our audience that aren't familiar with it yet and might be interested in getting involved, tell us a little bit about it. What is it, and where can our audience go to find more about it?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you again for having me on. I really appreciated chatting with you today. If folks want to learn more about our work, they can go to satoshiaction.io. We have a newsletter there that they can sign up for. Don't worry, we won't be selling you anything other than occasionally asking you to support our work. If you love the work that we do, if you think that it's providing value to Bitcoin and to the United States, please, look into donating to us. We accept Bitcoin or dollars. We'll take those fiat dollars off your hands and put them to good use.
And Dennis, you've been bringing the hot takes all show, my man. So do you have like an extra Twitter account I can send people to? Because you got a lot to say, and I got a feeling there's going to be more people that want to hear it. So where can I send them?
Yeah, I mean, you can look me up on Twitter, Dennis Porter. Luckily, I'm the most important Dennis Porter according to the Twitter algorithm, so you should find me easily that way. But also, if you need the username, it is Dennis_Porter_.
Amazing. Well, Dennis, it's been an absolute treat. Thank you so much for your time and wisdom and expertise this morning and sharing with us. It's been a blast. We'll have to have you back on again sometime, but it has been great today, and I hope you have an amazing rest of your week. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you. Cheers. All right, gang, we're going to take a quick break here at RoxomTV News, but when we return, we got more on the way with more of today's top stories, so stay tuned. We'll be right back with more after this.